Imagine you're on a commercial flight somewhere over the Baltic Sea. The pilot looks down at the navigation screen and something is wrong. The GPS says you're not where you're supposed to be, not off by a few miles, off by hundreds of miles. The system thinks your plane is somewhere over Egypt. You're in the middle of one of the most advanced airspaces on the planet, surrounded by billion-dollar satellites orbiting overhead, and somehow your aircraft has no idea where it is. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what has been happening to pilots flying over Europe, and it's been happening for longer than most people realize. I'm Nova. Welcome back to PulseAI, and today we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most alarming and underreported technological stories of the last few years. The mysterious signal that has been jamming and spoofing GPS across Europe, disrupting airlines, ships, emergency services, and even everyday navigation apps. And more importantly, we investigated who is doing it and why. Before we get into this, I want you to understand something. GPS is not just the thing that tells you to turn left in half a mile, it is the invisible backbone of the modern world. Financial systems use GPS timing to timestamp transactions. Power grids sync themselves to GPS signals. Emergency services depend on it. Air traffic control depends on it. The entire architecture of how our civilization runs is quietly tethered to a constellation of satellites orbiting 20,000 kilometers above your head. So when something starts messing with that signal, it is not a minor inconvenience. It is a serious, serious threat. Now, let's start with what pilots and sailors have actually been experiencing, because the reports are genuinely alarming. Starting as far back as 2019, but really accelerating around 2022 and into 2023 and 2024, aviation authorities across Europe began logging an extraordinary number of GPS anomaly reports. Planes flying over the eastern Mediterranean, over the Baltic states, over Finland, over Poland, over the Black Sea, they were suddenly receiving GPS data that was completely wrong. Not corrupted or noisy data, wrong data, data that confidently told the aircraft it was somewhere else entirely. This distinction matters, and I want you to understand it. There are two different things happening here, and they're both serious in different ways. The first is GPS jamming. Jamming is relatively blunt. You blast out radio noise on the same frequencies that GPS signals travel on, and you drown them out. It's like trying to hear someone whisper at a rock concert. The GPS receiver just loses the signal. It knows something is wrong. It can flag an error. Annoying and dangerous, but the system at least knows it's broken. The second phenomenon is called GPS spoofing, and this is where things get genuinely chilling. Spoofing doesn't drown out the GPS signal. It replaces it. Someone generates a fake GPS signal that is strong enough to override the real one coming from the satellites, and they feed the receiver false coordinates. The insidious thing about spoofing is that the system doesn't know it's been fooled. It thinks everything is fine. It is confidently reading data, displaying a location, calculating a route, and all of it is a lie. That is what has been happening to aircraft over parts of Europe. Planes confidently navigating to coordinates that don't match where they actually are. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, began tracking these incidents formally, and what they found was extraordinary in scale. Thousands of GPS interference events, dozens of incidents involving commercial aircraft where the navigation systems were actively giving false position data. In some cases, planes triggered their proximity warning systems because the false GPS told the autopilot the aircraft was dangerously close to terrain it wasn't actually anywhere near. Pilots had to disengage automated systems and fly manually, relying on old-school radio navigation the way pilots did before GPS even existed. We're talking about scenarios where, if the crew wasn't experienced and hadn't caught it in time, things could have gone very differently. And it wasn't just aviation. Ships in the Baltic and the Black Sea started reporting the same thing. Vessels would look at their GPS positioning and see themselves teleported, suddenly appearing miles inland or in a completely different country's waters. Port authorities were confused. Cargo ships were logging bizarre routes that didn't make any physical sense. search and rescue teams started picking up distress signals from vessels that appeared to be in places they clearly couldn't be. The maritime world started calling these ghost ships, vessels whose digital identity was in one place while the physical ship was somewhere else entirely. So the question everyone started asking was, who is doing this and how? Let me explain how GPS spoofing actually works, because understanding the technology helps you understand who is capable of it. GPS works by receiving signals from a network of satellites. Your device listens to multiple satellites at once, measures tiny differences in the timing of those signals, and triangulates your position with remarkable precision. A legitimate GPS signal, by the time it reaches the ground, is actually incredibly weak. We're talking about a signal that has traveled 20,000 kilometers through space. It's so faint that a relatively simple radio transmitter with the right software and the right antenna can broadcast a fake signal that is loud enough to completely overpower the real one. The spoofing software calculates what the fake satellite signals would look like if you were at a specific false location, and it broadcasts those fabricated signals in real time. Modern GPS receivers, particularly the ones in commercial aviation and shipping, were largely not designed to detect this kind of attack. They were designed for a world where the threat was signal loss, not signal manipulation. The technology to do this at scale, covering hundreds of miles, requires serious resources: high-powered transmitters, sophisticated signal processing equipment, technical expertise. This is not something a hobbyist builds in a garage. This is military-grade electronic warfare capability. And that brings us to the map. When researchers and aviation authorities started plotting where exactly these interference events were occurring, a pattern emerged that was pretty difficult to ignore. The hotspots clustered in specific geographic regions, around the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, along the Finnish border, across Poland, and very heavily concentrated in and around the Black Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean, and the conflict zones of the Middle East. And all of these areas have one thing in common: they are in the neighborhood of Russia, or Russia's military operations. The evidence that began to accumulate points overwhelmingly toward Russian military electronic warfare systems as the primary source of the GPS disruption across Europe. Researchers at organizations like the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, open-source intelligence groups, and aviation safety analysts tracked the patterns. The spoofing around Finland and the Baltic states intensified dramatically after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The signals being detected have characteristics consistent with known Russian electronic warfare equipment, systems like the Krasuka series and other military jamming platforms that Russia has openly developed and deployed. Russia has been developing and using electronic warfare capabilities for decades. In military doctrine, disrupting the enemy's navigation, communications, and sensor systems is considered as important as conventional weapons. During the Syria conflict, GPS disruptions were regularly detected around Russian military facilities there. Russian forces in Ukraine have been actively using GPS jamming to disrupt Ukrainian drone operations, Ukrainian artillery guidance systems, and Ukrainian communications. The technology is a core part of how Russia fights modern wars, and when you deploy that technology in a conflict zone or near a border you want to intimidate, the signal doesn't respect international boundaries. It bleeds across borders. It affects civilian infrastructure. It affects commercial airliners. It affects cargo ships. It affects you. Now, Russia has not officially claimed responsibility for any of this. And some researchers are careful to note that attribution in electronic warfare is complex. Signals can be relayed, spoofed sources can themselves be spoofed, and definitive technical proof is difficult to establish publicly. But the geographic correlation is striking, the timing with Russian military activity is striking, and Western intelligence agencies have been clear in their private assessments, even when public statements are carefully worded. NATO has been monitoring the situation and raising alarms about the vulnerability of civilian infrastructure to this kind of hybrid warfare. And here's the part of this story that really should concern you, because it goes beyond geopolitics. The GPS disruption over Europe has revealed something deeply uncomfortable about how dependent our modern systems are on a technology that was never really designed to be secure. The GPS signal itself is an open standard. It's unencrypted. It was built in the 1970s and 1980s for military use, then opened up to civilians. And the civilian world built an entire civilization on top of it without seriously grappling with what happens when someone decides to attack the signal itself. Aviation authorities are now scrambling to require aircraft to carry backup navigation systems. There is renewed interest in ground-based radio navigation systems that had been phased out as GPS became dominant. Systems like DME and VOR that use radio beacons to provide positioning independent of satellites. The maritime industry is looking at ELORAN, a long-range radio navigation system that is much harder to jam or spoof because the signals are powerful terrestrial transmissions rather than faint whispers from space. The European Union has its own satellite navigation system, Galileo, which has some anti-spoofing capabilities built in, and there is growing pressure to accelerate adoption of receivers that can cross-check multiple navigation systems simultaneously to detect inconsistencies. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Fixing this properly is going to take years and cost enormous amounts of money. In the meantime, pilots are being trained to recognize the signs of GPS spoofing. There are checklists now specifically for suspected GPS manipulation. Think about that for a moment. We are training commercial airline pilots to manually verify whether their navigation system is lying to them because we cannot fully trust the satellites. And the problem is not going to get smaller. Ukraine and Russia are both deploying increasingly sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. The conflict has become a live laboratory for GPS disruption technology. Whatever tactics prove effective in Ukraine get refined and improved. The technology proliferates. Other state actors are watching and learning. Iran has been linked to GPS spoofing in the Persian Gulf region. North Korea has repeatedly jammed GPS signals affecting South Korea. The playbook is spreading. There is also a broader cyber dimension here that I think gets underappreciated. GPS timing signals are used to synchronize everything from telecommunications networks to financial trading systems to the electrical grid. If you disrupt GPS timing at scale across a region, you are not just confusing the navigation apps on people's phones. You are potentially destabilizing the timing infrastructure of the entire economy. The financial sector has been quietly working on backup timing systems for exactly this reason. It is one of those systemic risks that experts have been warning about for a long time, and it is now being demonstrated in real time over Europe. I want to close with something that I think is the most important takeaway from all of this. We are living through a period where warfare has become invisible in a very literal sense. The battlefield is not just physical territory anymore, it is the electromagnetic spectrum. It is the data flows that your devices depend on. It is the navigation signals that keep planes in the sky and ships in the harbor. And the civilians in the middle of all this, the passengers on those flights, the sailors on those ships, the emergency dispatchers trying to locate a distress call. They have no idea it's happening. There is no explosion. There is no obvious attack. There is just a quiet manipulation of invisible signals, and then suddenly the world your devices see is no longer the world that actually exists. The GPS spoofing over Europe is a preview of what hybrid warfare looks like in the 21st century. It is deniable, it is persistent, it is cheap relative to conventional military power, and it is effective in a way that keeps adversaries uncertain and off balance without ever crossing the threshold of a declared military action. NATO countries are learning this lesson in real time, and the response, hardening civilian navigation systems, reviving old radio navigation infrastructure, developing better detection tools, is happening, but it is happening slowly against a threat that is moving fast. What I hope you take away from today is a slightly different relationship with the technology you depend on. GPS works so well, so reliably, that we have collectively stopped thinking about it. It is just there, like air. But unlike air, it can be manipulated by a powerful enough actor who has decided that confusing the world above your head serves their interests. The signals in the sky are not neutral. They are contested. If you found this investigation valuable, please share it. This is exactly the kind of story that deserves more attention than it gets. Subscribe to PulseAI for more deep dives into the technology stories that are shaping our world in ways that don't always make the headlines. I'm Nova, and I'll see you in the next one. Word count, approximately 2,500 words.